Welcome to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours, everyone. Thanks once again for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host or sometimes co-hosts to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is learning how to build relationships with recruiters to power your Salesforce career success. So if you've ever wondered how to increase your chances of getting hired by developing high impact relationships with recruiters and hiring managers, this is the session for you. I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session, Christopher Hopper. Christopher is a Salesforce recruiter at Imperastaff. He's a thought leader in the Salesforce ecosystem, consistently posting quality content on recruiting trends, topics, and the overall candidate experience. Prior to transitioning to the recruiting space, Christopher worked as a CRM consultant for over 10 years, so he's seen both sides of the coin, both as a candidate and a recruiter, and as such, he has a unique perspective on the recruiting process and its life cycle. I hope everyone brought their questions. It is awesome having you here co-hosting Office Hours with me, Christopher. Welcome.
Great to be here, Dave. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and further introduce yourself and share your Salesforce story?
Sure. Again, Chris Hopper out of Houston, Texas. Been around the CRM space for about 22 years now. Started my career as a developer and doing Siebel and Oracle CRM back when client-server technology was a big thing. Got trained by a consulting company right out of college and went to a boot camp and then started my career with CRM. From there, went to multiple consulting companies, Accenture probably being one of the biggest. Spent about 5 years at Accenture, being a developer, then technical team lead, solution architect, and then left consulting from a company perspective and went independent for a number, about 8 years, just as an independent contractor, also doing solution architecture, technical PM work, some development work, just really a full gamut of implementation work for various clients. Then back in 2016, decided to leave delivery. Starting to get a little burned out there and thought I had enough years of experience. I think it had been about 16 or 17 years of doing delivery and moved into recruiting. I didn't know I wanted to be a recruiter at that time. It was just an opportunity that was presented to me with the owner of Imperastaff. He had staffed me on projects when I was an independent consultant. And he had worked on a lot of SAP hiring and placement and recruiting. And he knew my background had been around CRM and Salesforce and Oracle, and asked me if I wanted to lead up the recruiting practice within Imperastaff. So he brought me on board, showed me the ropes a little bit about recruiting. I had been a hiring manager before. I had to bring in new people to our teams for various positions when I was with Accenture, as well as an independent contractor. As a PM, I was also responsible for hiring. So as Dave mentioned, I've seen both sides of the coin when it comes to being recruited personally as a candidate, as well as doing hiring and now doing recruiting. Another piece of the puzzle for my career when I was at Accenture, I was a career counselor. And so what that really meant was that when new people were joining Accenture within the group that I was a part of, it was up to me to be able to mentor and guide and try to get their career aligned with their goals and aspirations when they joined Accenture. And so I really enjoyed that. And now I'm basically able to leverage those skills when I'm talking to new people as far as them jumping into the Salesforce ecosystem and trying to give them some guidance as much as I can around the space and how to help, provide some opinion or share some knowledge about what I'm seeing in the industry. Yeah, and so day to day, what I do today is either talk to customers who are needing Salesforce hires, or talk to candidates who are in the job market and providing resume reviews, mock interviews, presenting opportunities to them about what I'm working on currently, as well as talking to them about salary discussions, possibly how to negotiate salary and things like that. And I know Dave has a list of questions that we've outlined that we'll discuss today. But thank you again for having me today's session.
Yeah, my pleasure, Christopher. And it's awesome to be able to have someone who's like we talked about, seeing both sides of the coin, because you know where folks are coming from, and have a unique set of skills that you can address their challenges and place them in the best possible position. So before we do kick off the discussion, I do see some new faces out there, which is awesome. So for the benefit of the folks that may be joining for the first time, I always like to briefly explain the purpose of office hours before we do open the floor for questions and discussion. And so if you're new, welcome. These sessions are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers as well as allies. Everyone's welcome to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics so that we can help you as a group achieve your professional development and your career related goals. And so for the next hour, this is your time. It's a collaborative mentorship opportunity. Everyone on the call is encouraged to step up and help answer and ask questions from your perspective, which of course will enrich the conversation and provide additional diversity of experience to the answers that are given. So as you've already seen, I've begun posting in chat. Do keep your eye out throughout today's session. I'll continue to post. And I share information that I gleaned from LinkedIn and other sources throughout the week. So learning opportunities, networking opportunities, employment opportunities, so on and so forth. If you want to ask a question at any point during today's session, this is your session. So please feel free to do so. Obviously, I've come up with my own questions, but I much prefer it if you all take over the session because really we're here to support you, not so much to listen to me chat. So if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand in the Google Meet software, then just go ahead and throw that in chat. I will monitor chat and I'll do my best to call those up in order. And so with that in mind, I'll be keeping my eye on chat here and I'll get us started. And so, before Christopher, we dive into building bridges with recruiters, I kind of wanted to approach candidate preparation from a chronological perspective. So one of the first things that everyone needs to work on when they decide to apply for a position, of course, is getting their resume in order. So if we could dive into that topic first, that would be great. And given the increasing role that social media plays in the hiring process, especially LinkedIn, which we're all familiar with, how important would you say are resumes in the hiring process these days?
I still think resumes are very important in addition to your LinkedIn profile. So now it's a combination of things where recruiters are traditionally looking at, but resumes are really the first and foremost piece of the kind of artifact around your background and what you've done. Very seldom do I have customers come to me and say, Chris, here's the position I have open, send me LinkedIn profiles that are a good match for this, right? Resumes are still, as some people may say, they're outdated as they might be. That's always the beginning piece of the conversation. Usually what I do as a recruiter is when I'm submitting someone's profile, it's a combination of things, right? It's going to be the resume. It's going to be some bullet points about why I think this particular candidate is a good fit. And so usually I'm doing a pre-screening process on my end. And then often I'm also sending the LinkedIn profile or any kind of digital artifacts around that individual that I find, whether they have their own blog, whether they have a digital portfolio. Those are all the things that help round out the submission and can evidently help make you a better fit for, or at least be a top contender for that particular position, because you're bringing a lot more to the table than just a resume. Now, I know not everyone has a strong digital portfolio yet or still work on the LinkedIn profile, but just something to think about as you continue your progression is to work on building those things out just to help kind of make you a little bit more marketable in the competitive industry that we're in, right? There's always little pieces of the puzzle here that we can strategically use, as on your behalf to help get you to the top of the pecking order a lot of times. Because if it's only a resume and a hiring manager is bombarded with 50, 60, 200 resumes on a given open position, what are some things in addition to a resume that can help make you stand out? And these are the things that I think personally are the differentiators.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and I want to foot stop on that because one of the topics we talk about often in these sessions is the importance of personal brand. And so you mentioned that the more you can demonstrate your technical proficiency, your experience, your education, your training, by adding links to your trailblazer.me profile or your personal portfolio that you've developed on Experience Cloud based upon the Trailhead module that's out there. Like you were talking about blogs, if you have a YouTube channel, those are all ways to develop your personal brand, and that's going to separate you, like Christopher was mentioning, from the rest of the candidates and really put you a cut above. So just wanted to stomp on that because it's an incredibly important point, and it's one that coming out of the military, a lot of folks don't have that training, and so it's good for them to hear the importance of personal branding, and that, like I said, that's one of the topics we explore quite often. So all right, so Phil asked, hey, I have heard that once recruiters get your name profile, they will hound you Is this real? How to engage, how to best engage with recruiters without triggering unwanted hounding.
Yeah. So the recruiting space is a little messy, right? And sometimes we get classified as being a used car salesman in a lot of cases, unfortunately, um, because some recruiters are very, commission driven, right? So just to give you a little background about how the industry works is we are commission based placement, right? When you're dealing with an external third party agency, recruiting agency, we get paid a commission once we place someone in a permanent position, right? Or it could be a contract position as well. The company that has engaged us is the one that's paying us the commission in order to get the hiring process, get the particular candidate hired in. Sometimes recruiters are only, lack of a better term, money hungry, and so they may hound people over and over and again, trying to get their resume, trying to get their contact information, trying to make a submittal. And I think some recruiting companies have a certain quota to meet. I can't speak to it as far as something that I've been a part of, but what I hear around the industry is that they have to make a certain number of contacts per day, they have to acquire a certain amount of resumes per day, they have to make a certain amount of submissions per day for each open position. And so that might be some of the impetus behind why you're getting hounded from a recruiter because of certain quotas that they have to meet within their particular agency that they work for. I won't say that's always the case, but that does occasionally happen from what I understand about the industry. One thing that I would suggest is if you do get approached by a recruiter, maybe do a little due diligence on your side to find out the legitimacy of that recruiter, right? So go to their LinkedIn profile, check them out, see how active they are, just to get a better feel, like if this is someone I want to deal with or not. Are they socially active? Do they have any recommendations on their LinkedIn profile? Who do they work for? Maybe look at the company that they work for. It's a legitimate company. There's so many pieces of the puzzle when it comes to recruiting that I think we as candidates also need to take some level of accountability to make sure that no one's just blowing smoke in front of us as far as the real opportunity. And sometimes what happens is a client or a recruiting company may have a direct relationship with the company and they may not. So sometimes you might find recruiting companies don't have a relationship with the company and are not really directly recruiting for them, but they're trying to get someone's resume to submit on their behalf to hopefully open the door up for the company. So it's kind of a sleazy sales tactic, so to speak, that you may run into occasionally. Um, so, I think the point is just to be careful and do a little bit of due diligence and research when you have someone reach out to you to try to help understand what's the legitimacy of that particular person or the company that's reached out to you inquiring about your resume.
Yeah, great points. And obviously, if these solicitations are coming through LinkedIn, the block and the mute features are your best friends. But ultimately, I think the point is, to Christopher's point, you want to develop relationships with those reputable recruiters who will then come to you time and again with legitimate offers. And there's plenty of those out there. So, but do be on your guard against the ones that aren't. We've got a couple hands raised before we get to Derek and John. Carrie had posted a couple questions, so we wanted to jump on those. So Carrie asks, when hiring managers are given a handful of resumes, do they typically go through them alphabetically, and do they stop when they find someone? Like, what's the process for going through those resumes?
Alphabetically, not necessarily. It's typically first in, right? So as they receive them, they're starting to review them on a gradual basis. Um, it's every hiring manager is different, right? So I can't speak to all of them, but it really depends on their timing as well, right? So if they get 3 or 4 resumes in a given day, they may not get to them until the next day or a couple of days later, based on whatever's happening in their professional work life at that time. But it's from a recruiting standpoint, I don't submit that many resumes for a given position, right? I may talk to 3 or 4 people, and some of them won't be a good fit. So I may submit 1 out of 2 or 2 out of 3, something like that, in regards to the position. And when you're using an external recruiter, they should be a little bit more selective in the process and not just pushing papers, what we call it in the industry, as far as just trying to get 100 resumes over to a hiring manager. That's usually why a hiring manager will use an external agency, because they don't want their time wasted being bombarded with resumes that they know are not going to be a good fit for them. So in regards to how they go about reviewing resumes, there is no one systematic approach. A lot of companies use an applicant tracking system, right? So a lot of times when you submit your resume to a position that's posted on LinkedIn or a website or something like that, there's a system on the company side that's doing keyword matches to determine how good of a fit this particular resume is versus the job description. And based on that percentage match, those resumes will get bubbled to the top of the HR, talent acquisition, or hiring managers stack. So that's the key piece about this, is trying to make your resume as specific as possible to the job description. Now, I know there's going to be some things in the job description that you don't have experience on, but for those that you can speak to, that keyword search is a key piece in the puzzle because of the applicant tracking system and the artificial intelligence that goes into play with keyword searches when you're matching a job description to a resume.
Yeah, that's good to know. And we had talked in a previous session about having that master resume that you can draw from to create your tailored resumes with those keywords for each of the individual positions you want to apply for. So more good information on that. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Carrie had a follow-up question, and we'll jump to Derek. She asked, generally, how many rounds of interviews should candidates plan on going through? I'm sure it differs by company, but there's probably a best practice out
Yeah.
there.
Typically between 3 and 4 is what I've experienced. Now, if you're doing a contract, so we have companies who do full-time placement, right? Bring you in as a full-time employee, or we have contract, or we have contract to hire. Sometimes on the contract or contract to hire, the interview process isn't quite as intense. It could be 1 or 2 interviews in that process. Whereas a full-time position, it tends to get a little bit more elongated. And, I have some customers who take 2 months to make a hiring because they want to talk to everyone at the C-level suite, the CIO, the CFO, CEO, CTO. And so that process takes a long time to get through. And I told the customer, I said, if you want to do that in the Salesforce space, good luck trying to keep someone intact for that long, because the market is so volatile right now mostly in the experienced senior level Salesforce space, that it's hard for me as a recruiter trying to keep someone alive, quote unquote alive, and on board with us for that length of time. But 3 to 4 interviews, anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks, is usually what you're looking at. There's always some fluctuation. The smaller companies tend to move a little bit quicker because they don't have as much red tape, of bureaucracy, and have to talk to so many people. For example, I had a developer that interviewed with the owner of a small consulting group today for half an hour. He got right back to me. The owner did, and said, "Hey, Chris, we're interested in moving forward in the process." I got with the VP of sales and the VP of delivery, and he's doing his second and third round tomorrow, right? So that's really a 2-day turnaround time for that particular instance, which is usually an anomaly. We really don't see feedback that fast with the larger companies. Smaller companies are a little bit more agile. They know that the market is very competitive, so they got to move fast to make some decisions. I have another customer out in the DC area. I submitted a candidate. We're going through the process beginning of March. Here we are, almost the end of April, and she went through a total of, I think, 5 interviews, and 2 of those 5 were a case study, right? So they provided her a series of requirements. She had to build some use cases around that, and then she had to actually demonstrate a prototype in regards that's tied to those particular use cases. This is, again, that position's $150,000 position for a consulting company. Some of these other positions are a little bit lower in the salary range, anywhere from mid-60s, mid-70s, with the smaller consulting companies or industry companies, where they are able to move a little bit quicker. So again, I've seen it all. There is no rhyme or reason. But I think on average, 3 to 4 interviews over a 2 to 3 week time span should be what you should look at as far as the process goes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, speaking from my team at Salesforce, we typically have 4 to 5 interviews. You've got the behaviorals up front just to determine if you want to work with this person, if they have the requisite customer facing skills, so on and so forth, to be successful in the role. And then once you get through those behavioral interviews, which are typically with recruiter, hiring manager, and some of your peers, Then you go to that 2-round technical interview to make sure you have the technical chops. So that's great information. So I see Derek had his hand raised and he's popped back in. Derek, did you still have a question or comment?
First of all, Christopher, thanks you for being on. I love your post on LinkedIn. You were talking about the ATS. Now, I get questions all the time from people on LinkedIn about how to format their resume, specifically because they're scared of the ATS. Now, I'm not a believer of ATS. I'm a big believer in networking, and I think you should always try to, as much as possible, hand your resume to a recruiter, virtually. So what would you say in recommendation for formatting? The plain white kind of list column, or a 2-column, something that stands out, or a mix?
Yeah, I don't think you should get too fancy, right? Because I think that ATS systems, and we don't use ATS, right? And some agencies do. My best guess is the more fancy we get with your resume, the worse chance you have of getting it through the process, because it doesn't know how to handle, all these different formatting techniques, right? So with table structures and, so I would think I'm a fan of simplicity when it comes to resumes. So bullet points, bold, right? And just keep it very linear, right? As far as your progression, your career progression. I don't like pictures of, this is my personal opinion. I don't care for pictures on a resume. I don't care for having your certifications on a resume. That's subject to interpretation, right? Some people like that to stand out that way. That's fine. I'm more of a guy who likes it just to be listed, right? So listing your certifications, listing your education, wherever it is. Now I am a fan of having links to your Trailblazer profile, to your certifications, to your digital portfolio, things like that on your resume, which I don't think the ATS system would necessarily kick you out because of having links. But to your point, Derek, sending your resume to an individual is a much better process than going through the masses of the ATS system. And when we send a resume to a particular individual, it kind of has to be a little bit of a nourishing process, right? Versus just saying, "Hey Joe, saw this position open on your company. I think I'm a great fit. Here's my resume. Let me know what you think." The hiring managers and HR and everyone else are getting hit up on LinkedIn as well, or through emails. So I'm a fan of trying to have a little bit more substance in that approach, and trying to do a little bit more research in order to help stand out in the process without just shooting over your resume. And trust me, I get resumes sent to me all day long on LinkedIn, but there's a little bit more of a tactful way to be able to do that, based on doing a little bit more due diligence on your side about the customer, about the position, about the business, about what they have going on in the future, and maybe even doing some network with those at the company to see if you can get any sound bites about what's happening there, just to help help portray that you've done a little bit more than what everyone else is doing, is just firing off a resume left, right, in every which direction. These things will definitely help you stand out and maybe get the attention of the hiring manager, or the recruiter, or someone internally, based on you doing a little bit. And now I'm not saying that's the end all be all, and you have, it will always work for you, but it does, in my opinion, get you a little bit farther ahead than anyone else.
I think that's where employee referrals can come in handy too, is before that employee who submits you, they can take a look at your resume because they know the company culture, they know probably what the hiring manager, recruiters are looking for, and they can help you tweak that resume.
Exactly. If you're able to get someone else to submit your resume on your behalf from an internal employee, you're miles ahead of anybody else. So as you start to look through positions and trying to make connections with people on LinkedIn of employees that currently work there, Salesforce admins or product owners or architects or whatever, the BAs, whoever is there that you think could be an advocate on your behalf, those are the kind of backdoor approaches that you want to take to see if are they open to having a phone call with you to hear a little bit more about your experience, so they can submit your resume to the hiring manager on behalf of you, right? And I think if you're able to do that, again, that's one of the best approaches you can take.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Christopher. And great question, Derek. I wanted to transition over to John, who's had his hand raised for a while. John, I see you posted your comment in chat. I'm happy to ask it for you, or you have the floor if you'd like to ask it yourself.
My initial question I'm coming at this slightly different. I did apply. I did get all the way to a final fourth interview. I interviewed with the recruiter, a couple senior directors, and a VP. Got all the way to the end, and unfortunately, I did not get the job. I was given great feedback. I was said, okay, your resume was great, your interviews went great, but we're not going to go with you. And I guess the issue I'm having now though is, so I got through all this, had all this success. Well, then I've applied to 3 other jobs very similar since then, and I can't even get the time of day. I can't get anyone to. I can't even get to a point where recruiters calling me. So how do I approach that? What kind of advice do you have to reach?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Sometimes it's, luck of the draw, right, John? I mean, sometimes, and that happens across the board when it comes to recruiting. And I could submit someone who I think is a shoe-in at a particular company, and the interview process falls apart for whatever reason. Like, I was like, this guy or girl is the perfect fit, and personalities clash or something just falls apart along the process. But John, I think that the point is you got to just continue to move forward, right? You had success, you had a little bit of momentum behind you, you've had some good conversations, you were able to get almost to the finish line, and then someone else was selected in your place, which is not which is going to happen, right? I think just to not stop, right? Just to keep the momentum behind you. One thing you may want to think about, John, is when was that? When was the last interview with that previous customer or business? When was that?
Let's see. That was about 2 weeks ago.
Okay. One thing you may want to do, and maybe you've already done this, is just follow up. A lot of times, if you're second place and they make an offer to somebody else, you don't always know if that offer went through. The candidate could have went a different direction. Something could have fell apart, right? Or they may have started and then decided it wasn't a good fit for them and bailed, right? So try to keep that line open for a little while longer, right? Just check in with them and say, just want to see if everything's still going forward with the other candidate. Did they accept the position? How's it working out? Something like that, just to keep that line open for a little bit longer, because you never know. And I've had this happen to me before where people check back in with me. And I told them initially the position was filled. It fell apart. I forgot about that individual. They came back to me at the right time. I was able to get them back into the mix, and they ended up getting the position. Yeah. So in regards to kind of your situation now, I mean, you're doing the right things. I think it's just finding another fit like that previous. I think one thing you might want to think about, John, just kind of just thinking out loud here, is some of the feedback that you've gotten. Is there anything that you can display in your resume or help embellish, or I guess bring to the forefront on your resume, or when you're reaching out to folks and trying to build some connections based on the feedback that you received, to help see if that could be a good strategy going forward, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I did actually. I did ask all those questions. So I actually added the recruiter I was working with on LinkedIn. I added the director I was working with on LinkedIn, and I told them that exact thing. If it falls through, please keep me in mind. And I did ask for feedback. I said, I would like to know. Obviously, I didn't make it through. I got to this point. It's like, what can I change? And the response I got was, the feedback I got was great and positive. Unfortunately, they just decided to go with a different direction. So I had no constructive feedback, which to me is it's a little frustrating, because it's almost like they're telling me there's nothing I can do. They're saying, "Oh, you're great, but there's nothing you can do," which that's it's a little disappointing, because they told me, they said my background fit, my passion fit, my culture fit. Like, they're telling me all these great things, but then I'm like, well, then why aren't you giving me the job?
Right.
So,
And sometimes, and I get that a lot, right? Sometimes I get, sometimes I get feedback. I can tell you today, I got an email back saying, Chris, we're not moving forward. That was all the feedback that I got, right, for the candidate. I have no idea. I try to pull more information out of that by calling the customer, asking for more feedback. And sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. It's sensitive, right? And so sometimes companies are not wanting to divulge too much from a HR lawsuit perspective, potentially, right? Which I don't know that much about, but I think they're worried about what they say may be offensive, or they have to tiptoe around that particular situation, John. That's kind of my understanding about why it happens.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great point. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. I know, Elio, you've had your hand up and down. Did you have a question or comment?
I had a comment to add to what John was talking about, and Christopher, thank you so much for giving us this insight. I think, John, you should look at it from one perspective. You did really good,
Right.
There's no doubt, right? You should not doubt your efforts, right? If the feedback was that you did good, take that and take that same energy and put it to good work. It should be telling if they don't give you a lot of good feedback or constructive feedback, maybe that company is not as great as you think it is. I know you want to get a good role, but maybe it's a telling of that organization. So keep that in mind. And also, Christopher, one thing that I've learned at Salesforce is I'm working on my own career internally here, and was a very eye-opening experience over the last few weeks. I was recommended to sit on interview panels. Now, we go through some certification inside of Salesforce, but folks, wow. Yeah, I know why I failed in my interviews internally like 6 months ago. So if you have an opportunity to sit even on mock interviews, I think that's something that is very beneficial. And maybe, Christopher, you can talk more about the what are your thoughts of those? Because for me personally, as I'm growing my career, I didn't think that they were that very important. And then I sat on panels where we were doing interviews with real candidates, and it was very eye-opening to see a top-level candidate, a very two or three very, very just below that, very, very good candidates, right? So kind of like what John's saying, well, I did really good. Why didn't I get the role? Sometimes it could be the organization. Sometimes it could be we were not aware, of what a top candidate is. And maybe you can talk about some of the stuff that you've seen that you can share with us that traditionally an employer won't divulge, right?
Yeah. And sometimes it's a learning process from the hiring manager too. They might not know what they want, right? Believe it or not. They have this vision of what they're looking for in somebody, and they have to go through a series of interviews with other candidates to help narrow it down. They may have, John, I don't know if you know who got selected or not, but they could have had two other candidates besides you and said no to everybody, right? And then maybe they made an internal promotion, right? Or maybe they put that position on hold. Who knows what the real outcome was? But I sat in an interview. I don't always sit in interviews that often, but today I sat in an interview this morning. It was 50 minutes long, the technical position, and they drill this guy 6 ways a Sunday, right? It's a very technical interview, and they just every 30 seconds throwing questions at him left and right. And personally, I thought he did a pretty good job. He probably got 80% of the questions right, give or take. And I'm not as technical as he was, but that's where I felt like he was. The client came back and said, he's too junior for the role. I was a little taken back. I don't care that much about not getting the position filled. I mean, that's meaningful, but I care more about, like, if I thought he was close and they said he was way too junior for the role, then it's always a matter of opinion, right? I mean, you can interview with 5 different hiring managers and you could be an all-star for one of them or 2 of them, and then you could be horrible and get the opinion of the other 3, right? And so sometimes it's a crapshoot, so to speak, a lot of times when it comes to the hiring process. And I hate to say it that way, but it's got to be personality match, it's got to be communication skills, it's got to be technical skills, it's got to be about future planning as well. This is somebody that I can work with in the future. They're going to be a pain in the backside if I hire them on. There's so many little nuances to the hiring process that it's hard to, try to get them all put in together into one process for it to be ironed out that way. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. You're spot on, John, as far as being a perfect fit for one company, getting close to the finish line, and then they decide to go a different direction, and then you hear radio silence for the other 3. So it's got to be a numbers game to some extent. And I'm not saying numbers game to just randomly post your resume to 1,000 positions a day. It's got to be a little bit more selective than that. And I think you're taking that approach, John, but you have to understand that if you get 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 or whatever that number is, It's about just getting your at bats. And that's why I tell newcomers is like, you guys see some pitchers, you're going to swing at some, you're going to miss some, you're going to get some foul balls. Eventually you'll get some base hits, and eventually you'll get, a single, a double, home run, whatever the case may be. But you got to get those at bats. And the only way to do that is step up the plate and get your resume submitted.
Yeah, these are all great points. I think the unifying thing to take away is don't take it personally, right? There's a lot of different factors that we all discussed on why perhaps they didn't get back to you, and then just bounce back, right? Get right back in the game and attack it again, and eventually, you'll find that role, you'll find the company that will bring you aboard. I will post a quick link in here for you, John. It's candorful.org. The subject of mock interviews came up. Candorful provides free mock interviews to vets and spouses, as well as active duty military members. You just go to the website, you sign up, and they will meet with you, and they have expert coaches to walk you through the interview process and help you out there. We'll grab a quick question or comment from Lindsey, and then we'll grab our picture, and then I'm going to circle back to Geraldine and Marcy's question, which are related. So, Lindsey, you have the floor.
Yeah, so John, I just wanted to add my 2 cents with your certain scenario. So if you established a good relationship with that recruiter, I would certainly go back and let them know, hey, I applied to these 3 roles. Do you see a fit? Would you mind sending my resume directly to the recruiters who are specifically on this job posting? So I've done that for plenty of my candidates that I've established a really good relationship with. The other thing is sometimes hiring managers will say, you're too technical for this role, but here's another option that we think you'd be a better fit for. So then, kind of a direction to go in. And if I get that feedback, I'm sharing, and you got that far in the process, I'm sharing your resume directly with that team, because that's a win for both of us. So I would absolutely follow back up with that recruiter, just letting them know that you applied to other roles and asking if they can help in any way.
And then, John, one other piece is everyone that you've interviewed with, make a connection with on LinkedIn. Right? Because you never know, maybe not right now, 6 months, a year, 2 years, they may go somewhere else. You're connected with them. They can potentially bring you on in the future, right? So it's always, you think about it, like the people that you meet and the people that you have started to build relationships with, LinkedIn is the perfect channel to keep those existing relationships alive.
Yeah, great points. There's been a couple of folks that were brought on as solution engineers on my team that didn't make it the first round. It took a couple interviews. Another factor is, you may have crushed it, John, and there just may have been an internal employee that wanted to transfer into that role, and it's cheaper to bring them in potentially. They already know the culture, so they're like, we're gonna go with the internal person. Sometimes that happens. It's happened at Salesforce before. Question. So Geraldine asks, hey Christopher, what are your thoughts on cover letters? I get a lot of questions on whether candidates should submit a cover letter or not. And Marcy piggybacked on that. Say, hey, I've got the same question as Geraldine. Are cover letters worth the time, or should we do a thorough summary section at the top of the resume? Great questions, ladies.
Good question. I'm personally a fan of cover letters. Again, if you ask 5 different people the same question, you may get 5 different answers. Or someone will be in camp and say yes, someone will be in the camp and say no. If your cover letter is personalized to the company and the position, I think it's going to set you apart. Now, you can also do that in the summary section of your resume, but you don't want your resume to be too much to handle, right? You don't want it to be a 1-page dissertation that your cover letter would be, right, in your summary section. So if you can be concise with your summary section of your resume and just have 2 or 3 key areas of interest about the position and the company and why you think you're a good fit, then by all means put it in the summary. If you feel like you're better at written communication and have 2 or 3 paragraphs worth of information that you want to display as far as your background, what research you have found, why you think you're a good fit, all those things, then by all means use a cover letter. Again, I personally like the cover letter. I read them. Again, you have to understand, my job is to get people hired, right? So I'm trying to build as much of a repository of good information that I can to submit on somebody's behalf. And the more information that I have to be able to do that, the more opportunity the odds are in our favor to be able to get you an opportunity, right, to be able to get interviewed with. So again, some people say, no, don't waste your time with cover letters. No one reads them. I think that some people may not read them. They don't have time to read them, right? But personally, I think it can do more good than harm. I don't think you'll ever get rejected for having a cover letter, right? So if you look at it that way, if you have the time and the diligence to be able to do it, it can help you more than hurt you in this case.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Dan, you have the floor.
Thanks, David. Hey, yeah, just going back to what you were talking about, getting hired, and then, excuse me, and then being somewhat disappointed when you get a message back thinking that you did a great job, and then, I'm sorry, we're not going to go in your direction.
Yeah.
My experience here is this, and I was a referral. Somebody referred me, and I wasn't looking for a job, but so I put it in. Sure, I'll go ahead and do that. And within a couple days, I got a message back saying, sorry, you're not a fit. I didn't even get to the interview stage. I was like, nah, well, I had a job already, but I was kind of disappointed. And I decided, all right, okay. But weird thing happened. I guess my resume got put around to different places because then I got a call that said, hey, we'd like to interview you for these other positions. And that's what happened with me. So when I was actually interviewing for the one position, I was asked during those interviews if I'd be interested in other positions. And that's how I ended up getting a role within Salesforce. So for me, I understand it's such a stressful time to go through. Even if you have a job, it's still stressful when you're interviewing for a position. It just is. My experience was once I got that second call back to go through the process, I actually interviewed. For me, it might have been a lot more than normal because I was interviewing for a few positions at the same time. So I went through like 12 interviews. So it was a lot for different positions, but I lucked out and got that. So just like Christopher said, just like David said, your resume is still online. They still have that. And just because you didn't make it for that one position doesn't mean that you're not in line for another position. So keep the faith and stay positive is all I can say.
Yeah, great points, Dan. Thank you. I wanted to grab Kathleen's question real quick. She had asked earlier, how long do you really recommend someone stay in a role? Is there a minimum so that you don't look like you're a job hopper? And then, obviously there's the other end of the spectrum where you stay in the role too long and you've kind of maybe removed opportunities for upward mobility and people kind of typecast you as that role.
Right. It's a rough gauge. 2 years, right, would be the ideal situation. The world we're in right now is a little unique, right? And I'm old school where I like to see a little bit of job stability. But with the ecosystem being as volatile as it is, companies are not always taken back when they see someone who had a 6-month stint here, an 8-month stint there, a year long. Now, if they did that through 20 years, they don't really have much faith that they won't do it with the new organization they work for either, right? But I think 2 years, 2.5 years is about a baseline where people need to stay. Now, if you're miserable and it wasn't a good fit for you, I've had people come in and come out within a few months because they realized it wasn't a good fit. And as long as they don't have a track record of that, I think it's okay. The hiring process and finding the right match is hard. It's hard as you as a candidate. It's hard as a hiring manager. Mistakes happen, right? And so sometimes people get hired and they realize, and sometimes they get sold a bag of goods too, right? So sometimes you may get a position pitched to you that seemed like this dreamy position about everything that you want to do in your career, and then you start and it's completely different than what they had portrayed to you during the interview process. And so when that happens, give a little bit of time to see if it gets flushed out and it becomes more meaningful position for you. But if it doesn't and they can't make it right as far as what they portrayed to you during the interview, I think you got to take it on yourself to be able to look elsewhere and make a change.
Yeah, that's awesome guidance. I would just also say, if you are switching positions, be aware of how that's going to look on paper. Like when someone looks at your resume, when someone looks at your LinkedIn profile, ideally you want to be moving up in responsibility, up in title. And so if you're accepting a lateral role or even a step down, you have to know how that's going to look and be prepared to defend that choice and have it make sense when you talk about it with recruiters.
And one piece there, Dave, as well, as far
Yeah.
as if you get asked about why you left your previous position, think about a good answer. What I mean by a good answer is if you hated the company and you hated the role, I don't think you should say that, right? I had someone just go through the interview process last week. She had within their company where she's currently at for 4 months. I spoke to her for 40 minutes. The first 20 was about how bad the company is, where she's at. I was hoping she wasn't going to present the same way to the employer. Like, I don't care what you tell me, that's between me and you from a candidate recruiter perspective, but don't. And I thought she had the professional maturity not to do the same thing with the hiring manager. He was a C-level exec that was interviewing her, but the feedback back to me was, Chris, she aired out the dirty laundry about her current position, about how bad it was, how bad the company was, and this and that. That's not really a good look for you to be so negative about a position that you're in. So think about the proper way to kind of, I guess, frame that so you still have a positive position when you're talking about those details.
Yeah, it's a great point because you're not only burning the previous bridge, you're burning the current one as well. So.
Yeah. And believe it or not, the Salesforce ecosystem, as big as it is, it's pretty still tightly knit, right? So what I mean by that is a lot of times people talk, right? And LinkedIn is a good avenue where people are talking behind the scenes. And I've had folks who I submitted and they've done some due diligence on their side where the hiring manager went back to a previous employer because they had a connection there, asked about this candidate. There was some previous history to it and they decided not to move forward. So you kind of always have to understand that as big as the tech scene is, as big as Salesforce is, it's really small because there's a lot of inner chatter that happens.
Yeah, great points. We'll grab a quick question comment from Geraldine, then we'll go to Michael in chat and then back to Iris. So Geraldine, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I wanted to piggyback off Kathleen's question a bit, just with a follow-on about what advice you might have for any military spouses that are in the group that may have large career gaps on their resume, or they may look like they job hop a lot from moving to different locations. What advice would you give to them? Yeah,
so I try to be as transparent, or I recommend to be as transparent as possible in your resume. You don't really want to hide anything because then a company may find fault in that. So if you've had some job hops or you've had some gaps in your longevity of your career, just display it on your resume about why you might have left, right? A lot of times I see resumes saying was let go because the company went bankrupt, for example, or lost my position because an acquisition occurred. Those are all meaningful reasons to make a move, right? And so again, transparency is key in my opinion, because if you don't have that, they may reject you off the offset because there's nothing telling them that you're not a job hopper because they can't read it in black and white on their resume. Same thing for career gaps. Again, I'm a big fan of just saying, if you had a gap of years between where you are and where you were, talk about why that was, right? And have a few bullet points about what you're doing instead. I think helps build a story on your behalf.
Do you think there's risk about having that conversation? I don't feel like I had to hide it, definitely in the Salesforce ecosystem. However, previously I would never say, that I was a veteran or a military spouse. So what are your thoughts around that? Especially, I know that that's top of mind for a lot of military spouses, thinking, oh, you're going to move, right, in a few years.
Well, we're kind of in a new world now, remote, right? So if we're having remote positions, that transfer of locations isn't as big of a deal as it once was. I understand what you're saying though, as far as if you're an in-house position and worried about you moving and having to be released from your job. But the way that I'm seeing the ecosystem right now is majority of positions are remote, so location shouldn't be such a hindrance in the application and interviewing process. And maybe that's the right way to take it as far as looking for remote positions. So if you have to get relocated again, you don't have to worry about the risk of you losing your position because you're having to move.
Thank you.
Awesome. We'll move over to Michael, and then we'll come back for Iris and Elio. And so we've got about little less than 10 minutes left. Michael mentions that he's served in the Air Force for 20 years, having a hard time fathoming moving between companies. You and me both was there with you. He's been indoctrinated to the embrace the suck mentality, and how do you break that? And I would just offer real quick, I would, I think, Michael, you've attended enough sessions and you've talked with enough folks to know what the ecosystem looks like, to know what you can probably expect from a role, what the benefits are, what the work-life balance is going to be. I would define for yourself what you want that to look like for you, what makes sense for your goals, your objectives, your life, your family, and then have that as hard and fast rules for when you're negotiating your job, so that you don't fall into the temptation of, I'll just put up with it because I'm used to hard positions. It's not the military. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of support that exist that are unique to the Salesforce ecosystem. And you definitely want to leverage that. But I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Christopher for some more comments.
Right. So I guess embrace the suck meaning that your current position is not that good. Is that what we're saying here?
So embrace the suck in my experience in the Air Force is you get put where you're put. You have very little say what your job is, what your career is, where you're living.
Right.
And you just embrace it, whether you like it or not, until it changes again. So that's
right.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing. And I'm very lucky. I think I'm going to do very well. It's something that popped in my mind. It's like I'm hearing people talking about moving 1 to 2 years or doing this or doing that, and I'm going to get there, but right now it's a little
and I'm a fan of embrace the suck, right? Especially as a newcomer. And here's part of the situation that I'm seeing from the outside looking in is like, we hear about these high-paying positions, being a Salesforce admin, being a BA, being a developer, right? Doing all these great things. The reality is you may have to take a position that is not that, right? You may have to take a position that's a support analyst, for example. You may have to be a help desk rep supporting, the sales staff or the field service staff, or being a service a rep for a call center, right? Using Salesforce. So I think we need to figure out whatever we can do to get our foot in the door, to be able to gain some momentum and get some more skills along the way, whatever that is, right? Some people like to only look at one particular position and that position only, and they're not going to do anything except for apply for positions that are specifically as a Salesforce admin because they think that's owed to them, for example. I've been able to place newcomers in a help desk position this year specifically. I usually don't get a whole lot of leads or positions for newcomers. This year, I think I've placed 4 newcomers who got certified, and they're help desk analysts, right? They're support analysts, right? So they're supporting sales and service, answering the phone, answering emails, working off a ticketing queue about system problems that users are having. It's not a glamorous position. They have to work weekends some, they have to work holidays some, but they understand this opportunity is the first one that, is the one that's going to get their foot in the door and then expand elsewhere within the organization itself, or having a year or two behind you being that will at least demonstrate that you're willing to embrace the suck for a little while you're going to look for something in the future.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Michael. We've got a couple minutes left. Wanted to get to Iris and then Elio. So Iris, you have the floor.
I'll be quick, I promise, Elio. Thanks for being here, Christopher. This is, again, another fantastic conversation. We're talking a lot about the senior job hires as they go on, but a lot of the people on this call and a lot of people I come across are brand new. And when you say things about like their personal brand, the portfolio, this and that. What's great about Salesforce is a fantastic transitional career. What's one thing that you would say is the best thing for them to do when they have worked on the interview, they have got the resume, but they're also transitioning from the military, so they've got so much to do, they don't know LinkedIn yet? What's one thing they can do to make themselves stand out in that crowd?
Sure. I think building, right? Building things, right? Building things on the platform, right? Mm-hmm. And we all can be smart about what that means, as far as building something to manage your finances, for example, or maybe something you were doing in the military that you thought a CRM system could be used to track something you did in the past. Or it could be, I've seen apps that have been built as far as ranking their favorite TV shows, right? And there's all kinds of, then you can create reports and dashboards off of that, or you can put certain flows in place or put certain field validation rules around that. The sky's the limit as far as the things that we can build on the platform, but we just have to be a little bit, I guess, smart about those things and just think about, just list 10 or 15 things that you think would make sense for a CRM to have based on your previous experience, and work and chip away at those. Because to me, if you are bringing that to the table for an interview, or you have a link to that in your resume, that's going to put you far and beyond other people who haven't pushed through that resistance to be able to build things themselves. When I was a hiring manager, we had people that would show us their dev orgs, or we had people that would bring in, I had someone that was getting interviewed for a training, and she brought in a binder of her training material, right? She got the position. Those that have a Salesforce dev org that have some tools and some assets and some things built out there, those people are the ones that are pushing through the resistance and being a differentiator in the job market. So you can't just rely on Trailhead, because that's very linear and that's kind of a staged approach, which everybody can do. To differentiate yourself is those things that make you unique based on your background, based on your creative skills, based on things that you've experienced in the past, where you can leverage a platform to help illustrate that you have the skills and capabilities to do things that can provide value to potential employers.
Thank you.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, the reason why I got hired at Salesforce was not because, I guess, let me back up to say I didn't get hired for the role that I interviewed with at Salesforce. I actually got hired for a separate role, but it was because they considered me for a different role based upon me pulling out my dev org during the interview and showing them that I used the product and how I used it and I've been building. So that's what they were really impressed with that. And even though I didn't get that role that I applied for, they're like, hey, listen, we're going to find you a different role and we'll bring you aboard because we love your passion for the platform. So I was able to stand out in that way. So exactly what Christopher is saying. We've got about a minute left. And so I wanted to get to Elio before we close. Bring us home, Elio.
You bet. Christopher, I know we talked about time and grade, how long you should be there. I personally did some contract work in my career, in the middle of my career. Could you give insight into that area? I know that there's contracts that you can do for 6 months or a year to kind of understand, is this an industry that I want to get in? That's how I use the contract environment as I was trying to figure out what was my next step. Do you have, or can you give us some insight about how recruiters look at people that are looking for those types of roles?
Yeah, contracting by far is a good path to take. Those help desk individuals that I spoke about earlier, they're on a 6-month contract to hire setup, right? And so the good thing about contracting is, if a company is willing to do that, is you determining if it's a good fit for you, and it's a good fit for them, right? So the contract is a short-term situation, sometimes 3, 6, 12 months, whatever the duration is, with the potential to hire you on as a full-time employee if the stars align, if it's a good fit for you, it's a good fit for them. I'm a big fan of contract to hire because, sometimes misfires occur when you do a direct hire, and the contracting scene lets you get your foot in the door, lets you fill things out, lets you determine if it's something you want to do long-term, and being able to move through the ecosystem doing different things kind of builds a portfolio and builds some experience behind you, so you can kind of figure out what you want to do long-term, right? So if there's an opportunity that's presented to you, contract positions may pay, a lot less than what a full-time position would be, because you'll be a 1099, maybe you'll be an unbenefited W-2, something like that. And with contract positions, usually there's no paid time off. There's no 401k match. There's like none of those perks and benefits. But if you can just be a straight hourly contractor to get your foot in the door somewhere, I think that's a great advantage to be able to use to get you started in your career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned that. I haven't been a contractor in 12 years, but I tell some of the people that reach out, at the end of my contracting role, the contracts that the company that was representing me to place me, they made up for not having benefits. I was very well compensated in an hourly stage in a situation where I was able to afford my own insurance and my own savings. So there is some plus and minuses, but I think it does give people an opportunity to check out industries. I know there was an industry that I won't mention here, but I wouldn't want to go work in that industry again because I saw through a contract that I was very successful at. I didn't care for the industry, so it gave me an insight, and I go, yeah, that's not for me. So, it's a good insight.
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks everyone. I know we're a couple minutes over, so thanks for hanging out. Before we do close, I wanted to thank Christopher very much for the past hour of awesome conversation, diving into recruiting, interviews, all aspects of the candidate experience. Thanks so much, Christopher.
Great. Thank you all for having me today.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you as well to everyone here. Appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, please have a safe rest of your week.